Welcome to History Teller YT, where the ancient world breathes again through storytelling. Today, we begin a journey deep into one of the most extraordinary chapters of human civilization, the world of Hammurabi, King of Babylon, creator of one of the very first written law codes on Earth, and architect of a society built on justice, knowledge, power, and belief. This story will take you 4,000 years back, to a land of towering ziggurats, river cities shaped by irrigation, temples filled with music and mathematics, warriors defending empire borders, priests speaking to gods, scholars writing on clay tablets, and judges using law to protect ordinary people. You will witness how Hammurabi united warring states through diplomacy and military brilliance, how his legal vision protected widows, merchants, farmers, and workers, how Babylonian women ran businesses and shaped family culture, how slaves could earn freedom, how temples functioned like universities, hospitals, and banks, and how science, astronomy, literature, mathematics, religion, and architecture helped build a society so advanced that its ideas still echo in our modern world. This is not just a history lesson. It is the story of identity, struggle, invention, order, justice, belief, ambition, and legacy. It reveals how humanity first structured law, government, and community, how people loved, learned, worshipped, dreamed, and fought to shape their destiny. If you love ancient empires, forgotten cultures, hidden secrets, and world-changing ideas, then stay with us, because this history will not only educate you, it will transport you. It will make you see our own world differently. So sit back, open your mind, and let History Teller YT take you into the heart of Babylon, a civilization of stars, stone, science, and spirit. A civilization that still lives inside our laws, our languages, and our imagination. This is the story of Hammurabi. Let's begin. Before Hammurabi rose to power in the early 18th century BCE, the world of the ancient Near East was already shaped by thousands of years of cultural development. The land stretching across Mesopotamia, between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, was one of the most fertile regions known to humanity. Here, civilizations had grown from clusters of farming villages into sophisticated kingdoms long before Hammurabi's birth. By Hammurabi's time, people were already living inside cities surrounded by tall defensive walls, irrigated fields, organized temple districts, and complex social hierarchies. Mesopotamia had witnessed the rise and fall of the Sumerians, the dominance of the Akkadians, the revival of independent city-states, and the spread of writing systems like cuneiform that permanently changed human communication. Civilization in this region had developed around the ability to control rivers. The unpredictable flooding of the Tigris and Euphrates demanded cooperation and planning, which encouraged the creation of governments, labor forces, and religious institutions that could coordinate canal building and manage shared farmland. Over generations, people living here went from simple farming settlements to fully planned cities with marketplaces, schools, workshops, and administrative centers. Certain cities, such as Uruk, and Lagash became legendary centers of power. Epic stories like the tale of Gilgamesh emerged from this period, reflecting the deep interaction between myth, religion, and kingship. Before Hammurabi, law was not new to the region. Different city-states had their own legal traditions. Kings like Yorinimu had issued law codes centuries earlier, attempting to bring social rules into written form. These earlier codes often dealt with issues like marriage, property, and punishments for violent crime. However, most earlier law systems were limited to specific regions and never achieved a unified scale across all Mesopotamia. By the time Hammurabi appeared, the land was shaped by political tension, cultural richness, and constant warfare among city-states such as Larsa, Mari, Ashur, and Eshnunna. These kingdoms competed for control of land, water, wealth, and trade routes that connected Mesopotamia with Anatolia, the Persian Gulf, and beyond. Into this landscape of rivalry and ambition, Hammurabi would rise, not only as a conqueror, but as a reformer. The world was preparing for transformation, and the centuries of accumulated traditions and conflicts formed the environment from which Hammurabi's legal code would emerge. His achievements would stand apart because he unified older ideas under one authority and presented a legal text that aimed to guide an entire empire, not just a single city. Before Hammurabi, Babylon was not yet the mighty empire history remembers. It was originally a small, modest city located along the Euphrates River, surrounded by older and stronger powers. Babylon was overshadowed by cities like Isin and Larsa, which controlled important religious centers and long-distance trade routes. To understand Hammurabi's achievements, we must first understand how Babylon slowly evolved from an unremarkable settlement into a rising power. Babylon's early kings focused on internal growth rather than expansion. They strengthened city walls, repaired irrigation canals, and developed temple complexes dedicated to Marduk, the city's patron god. Religion played a central role in identity, and Babylon's rulers believed they were chosen protectors of divine order. By the time Hammurabi was born around 1810 BCE, Babylon was changing. Trade routes began shifting, making the location more valuable. Babylon sat at the crossroads between northern Mesopotamia and the Persian Gulf, attracting merchants who carried metals from Anatolia, timber from Lebanon, stones from Iran, and luxury items from distant lands. New wealth flowed into markets, encouraging craft production and cultural exchange. Babylon's population grew rapidly, and with growth came political ambition. Hammurabi inherited a stable but vulnerable kingdom. His father, Simubalit, had already begun strengthening alliances and preparing the city for independence from larger powers. Hammurabi continued this path, but with much sharper intelligence and greater ambition. What made Babylon special was not size or military strength, but organization. The city valued literacy and administration. Scribes recorded taxes, legal disputes, and business contracts. Schools taught reading and mathematics. Temples stored grain and acted as banks, lending goods to farmers who paid back after harvest. Hammurabi recognized that law could unify this complex society, rather than allowing local traditions to dominate. He envisioned a system that made Babylonian identity stronger than regional identity. When Hammurabi finally took the throne in 1792 BCE, Babylon's moment arrived. Through careful military movements, diplomacy, and internal reforms, he began transforming his kingdom from a regional state into an empire. Victories over Larsa, Mari, Eshnunna, and Assyria expanded Babylonian territory dramatically. For the first time, a single ruler controlled most of Mesopotamia. This expansion required a new kind of political tool. Not only armies, but laws that could bind people from different ethnicities, languages, and cultural backgrounds into one shared civilization. The birth of this empire paved the way for the Code of Hammurabi, which would serve as a statement of royal authority, a declaration of justice, and a public promise to protect social order. The Code of Hammurabi did not appear out of nowhere. It was built upon the foundations of earlier Mesopotamian traditions. Religion, economy, and social structure all shaped Hammurabi's understanding of justice. In ancient Mesopotamia, people believed rulers were chosen by gods to maintain order in a universe filled with potential chaos. Society was divided into distinct classes: free citizens, dependents, and slaves. These social layers had existed for centuries, and Hammurabi did not eliminate them. Instead, he acknowledged their reality and shaped his laws around them, offering rights according to status. This was not equality by modern standards, but it was progress for its time. Laws were written and visible, meaning justice no longer depended only on a king's whim. Mesopotamian religion deeply influenced Hammurabi's worldview. Temples were powerful institutions that managed land, labor, and wealth. Priests played major roles in distributing resources and maintaining rituals that linked people with divine protection. The idea that gods judged human action meant that law and religion were inseparable. Hammurabi believed his authority came from the sun god Shamash, the god of justice. This divine connection allowed him to claim that his laws were universal truths rather than personal opinions. The prologue and epilogue of the Code are filled with religious language, portraying Hammurabi as a shepherd of his people, chosen to bring peace and justice. This religious framework helped unify the empire because citizens accepted laws not only out of fear of punishment, but out of respect for divine order. Economically, Mesopotamia needed law to manage complexity. Farmers depended on canals controlled by the state. Merchants traded internationally using contracts. Artisans relied on standard weights and measures. Without legal consistency, the economy would collapse. The state controlled weights, measures, and marketplace pricing. This oversight served two goals: preventing inflation and protecting consumers. Merchants caught using dishonest scales faced mutilation or exile, demonstrating how seriously economic fairness was valued. Hammurabi believed trust between buyer and seller shaped the empire's identity. Wage laws protected workers from exploitation. For example, brickmakers earned a fixed amount of grain, harvesters were paid per season, and herders received shares of animals born under their care. These wage structures limited negotiation disputes. Nobody could demand unfair wages, whether employer or employee. Trade taxation enriched the state treasury. Merchants paid border duties when entering new regions, especially highly profitable ports and caravan cities. These duties funded military defense and infrastructure repair. State finance records show Hammurabi issued periodic debt relief decrees, canceling obligations to help poor farmers regain stability. Such policies strengthened loyalty, reduced rebellion risk, and earned Hammurabi a legacy as protector of the weak. Temples acted as government storehouses. They stored taxed grain, redistributed wages, and issued loans. At the same time, temples required contributions to support priests and ritual expense. That dual function, spiritual and economic, made religious institutions a pillar of Babylon's financial world. Finally, taxation created social order. People understood that paying taxes meant receiving justice, security, irrigation, and protection from invasion. Babylonian citizens expected government responsibility in exchange for taxation. Hammurabi's law system, infrastructure planning, and military defense relied entirely on this exchange of obligation. Together, these economic practices reveal an empire far more advanced than many assume. Hammurabi built a financial system rooted in accountability, fairness, and regulation. His economy did not rely on chaos or random tribute. It ran through written contracts, bureaucratic oversight, and balanced law. This economic stability helped Babylon survive beyond his lifetime, influencing later monarchs who saw how law and economy strengthened one another. Cities in Hammurabi's empire were not random clusters of houses. They were carefully planned systems that balanced spiritual purpose, administrative control, economic activity, and defense. Babylonian urban environments developed across thousands of years, shaped by geography and cultural evolution. When Hammurabi reigned, Babylon and other major cities like Borsippa, Sippar, and Nippur stood as remarkable architectural achievements. Their success depended heavily on their physical organization, their irrigation access, and their social layout. Babylonian cities grew around water. The Euphrates River flowed through Babylon, splitting it into districts connected by bridges and canals. These waterways were more than transportation routes. They were lifelines delivering drinking water, crop irrigation, sanitation, and flood management. The city used a web of canals to bring water directly into neighborhoods, powering mills and feeding gardens. Hammurabi understood that city planning required hydraulic engineering, and excavation evidence shows canal embankments reinforced with baked brick and bitumen. City walls symbolize protection and political presence. Babylonian walls were tall, thick, and frequently rebuilt. They were made of sun-dried mud brick, baked brick, and timber support. Watchtowers allowed soldiers to see vast distances, and fortified gates regulated movement between city and countryside. These defenses represented safety, but they also projected royal power. When travelers approached Babylon, massive walls reminded them that they were entering a sophisticated kingdom. Even though Hammurabi's Babylon lacked the later legendary walls of Nebuchadnezzar II, the foundations of that architectural tradition already existed. At the heart of every Babylonian city stood temples. These structures were not merely religious. They were cultural, legal, financial, and administrative centers. Temple complexes included libraries, storehouses, kitchens, dormitories, workshops, and sacred courtyards. Priests, scribes, and workers served within these walls. Temples managed land leases, grain taxes, and loans, functioning like government headquarters. Ziggurats, the towering temple platforms, dominated skyline silhouettes. They symbolized a staircase between earth and heaven, believed to link humans with divine realms. Babylon's ziggurat was already a source of pride long before Nebuchadnezzar rebuilt it into the famous structure remembered in later history. Residential architecture reflected social diversity. Wealthier families lived in large courtyard houses with multiple rooms, decorated walls, and private shrines. These homes often contained sections for servants, storage, textile production, and family gatherings. Poorer neighborhoods consisted of smaller, simpler homes made of packed clay and reed roofing. Because Mesopotamia lacked stone and forest resources, mud brick dominated construction. Yet despite material limitations, houses were highly functional, naturally cooled by thick brick insulation. Market districts created constant movement in Babylonian cities. Merchants lined streets offering pottery, bread, vegetables, perfume oils, fabrics, baskets, wine, beer, and jewelry. Taverns served beer made from barley, attracting workers after long days. Farmers sold livestock and produced transported from surrounding villages. Caravans arriving from distant regions unloaded goods that added foreign scents and textures to city life. Price boards listed public costs of bread, wool, and beer. Markets also acted as meeting spaces. People exchanged news, arranged marriages, hired laborers, and negotiated business contracts. Public squares connected administrative and religious buildings. Government offices stored tablets, recorded taxes, and hosted court hearings. Scribes sat at benches writing contracts as customers dictated. Officials checked documentation for land or loan disputes. Law enforcement patrolled markets to prevent theft and argument escalation. Noise, music, debate, and prayer filled the air. People gathered at shrines, shared meals on rooftops, or watched performers playing harps and drums. Clay ovens baked bread near alleyways and open courtyards. Daily life blended hard work with ritual and celebration, making city environments dynamic places buzzing with human interaction. Urban planning under Hammurabi was not accidental. It reflected a vision of civic life where households, temples, markets, and government worked together under legal order. Cities functioned as symbols of identity, showing the world that Babylon was more than a military power. It was a civilization grounded in architecture, regulation, and social harmony. To appreciate Hammurabi's empire, one must step into the daily life of an ordinary Babylonian city resident. The reality was vibrant, practical, and deeply interconnected with community networks. People lived in densely packed neighborhoods where families knew each other well. These communities formed layers of identity beyond formal class categories. Neighbors shared tools, exchanged labor, and supported one another through festivals and hardships. Homes were built around courtyards to maximize airflow and privacy. These courtyards served as dining spaces, work areas, and family gathering places. Cooking fires burned in clay ovens, producing the aroma of barley loaves and roast meats. Larger homes featured extra rooms for weaving, pottery, brewing beer, or storing grain. Many households produced their own goods to sell, weaving cloth or preparing food products. Women typically managed these domestic industries, contributing to family income. Inside the home, furniture included reed mats, wooden stools, low tables, and clay vessels. Decorative items, such as carved seals, small figurines, and painted pottery added personality to rooms. Lamps burning plant oil illuminated spaces after sunset, creating soft, flickering light. At night, families slept on mats rolled out along the floor or rooftop. Summer nights were especially hot, so sleeping outdoors became tradition. Neighborhood streets were narrow and winding. Without sewage systems, runoff water flowed through side channels, and workers swept streets to reduce waste. Vendors walked door to door shouting product names: milk, bread, fish, clay jars, reed baskets. Children played tag, rolled clay balls, and practiced writing on broken pottery shards. Schools educated boys destined for scribal work, teaching mathematics, literature, and law. Literacy was rare among the general population, but writing surrounded people visually: tablets on walls, contracts in courts, and religious texts in temples. The soundscape was intense: donkeys braying, merchants arguing over prices, musicians drumming, priests chanting hymns, and children calling across rooftops. Markets pulsed with life, especially on festival days. City routines revolved around the sun. People woke before sunrise, fetched water, and prepared breakfast, often bread dipped in date syrup or oil. Men left for farms, workshops, or government offices. Women handled weaving, childcare, and housework. Teenagers learned trades from parents or served as apprentices. Hammurabi understood this, and many of his laws focused on property, wages, business responsibility, and financial fairness. If a builder made a weak house, he could be punished severely because the entire system of trust depended on professional reliability. If a merchant cheated another, the law stepped in to stop corruption. Hammurabi's law was not just moral, it was practical. Cultural tradition also shaped the writing style of the code. Stories, legal phrases, and mythological ideas from Sumerian and Akkadian cultures merged into Hammurabi's legal language. The code preserved older customs while setting strict new standards. In this way, Hammurabi honored heritage but demanded accountability. The result was a legal masterpiece that stood as both cultural testimony and judicial innovation. Its creation marked the moment when law became a tool for empire building, and when written justice began shaping civilization for millennia. Hammurabi's journey toward becoming one of history's most influential lawgivers began long before he ever sat upon the Babylonian throne. Born around 1810 BCE, Hammurabi grew up in a world of shifting alliances, military rivalries, and intense political strategy. His father, King Hammurabi, prepared him for leadership from childhood. Royal training in ancient Mesopotamia was rigorous and multi-layered, covering everything from military planning to temple administration. As a young prince, Hammurabi would have studied mathematics, astronomy, literature, and the legal traditions of older kings, an education that gave him both intellectual depth and practical insight. From a young age, Hammurabi witnessed the complexity of ruling a kingdom where people came from diverse ethnic groups such as Amorites, Akkadians, Sumerians, and Semites. Each community had its own traditions, regional gods, and expectations of justice. These differences could easily destabilize a country, but Hammurabi learned early that managing diversity was not weakness, it was strength. Babylon's location made it a cultural crossroads, and Hammurabi saw that diplomacy, not only military power, was necessary for a successful reign. He observed how scribes recorded contracts, how temples collected taxes, and how elders resolved disputes. These experiences later shaped his belief that written law should support governance rather than replace it. In addition to intellectual training, Hammurabi was raised with strong religious education. The kings of Babylon claimed divine legitimacy, meaning they believed they ruled under the authority of the gods. Hammurabi grew up honoring Shamash, Ishtar, and Marduk, the rising central god of Babylon. Religious rituals taught him discipline and responsibility. He learned that kingship was not simply about issuing commands. It was a sacred duty to maintain cosmic balance. Mesopotamians believed chaos was always waiting to break into human life, and rulers had to protect society from it. This belief fueled Hammurabi's passion for justice. As a prince, Hammurabi also trained in military skills. He practiced archery, spear handling, chariot riding, and battlefield formations. The constant warfare that surrounded Babylon meant every royal heir had to be prepared to defend the kingdom. Historical evidence suggests Hammurabi spent time observing military councils and studying how generals negotiated troop movement, supply distribution, and enemy strategy. These lessons proved invaluable when Hammurabi later expanded Babylon into an empire. Hammurabi also inherited a kingdom facing threats. His father had begun resisting the influence of powerful neighbors like Larsa and Eshnunna, but their strength was still overwhelming. Hammurabi learned from his father's successes and failures, shaping a political mind that was patient, calculating, and persistently focused on long-term stability. He understood that kingship required more than bloodline. It demanded the ability to unite people, reshape institutions, and adapt to changing circumstances. All these experiences formed the foundation of Hammurabi's future achievements. He did not become a legendary king overnight. He was shaped through years of disciplined preparation, observation, and reflection. By the time Hammurabi reached adulthood, he possessed the skills, knowledge, and ambition needed to lead Babylon into a new era. The young prince was ready to become the architect of a future empire. When Hammurabi ascended the throne in 1792 BCE, Babylon was not yet the imperial capital we imagine today. It was a rising but vulnerable kingdom surrounded by stronger and older states. Larsa controlled strategic canal networks to the south. Mari ruled vital trade routes to the west, and Assyria exerted pressure from the north. To the east, the kingdom of Eshnunna commanded military power and economic influence. This geopolitical environment demanded extraordinary caution, intelligence, and strategic thinking from the new king. Hammurabi inherited a state that needed unity. The internal structure of Babylon at this time was complex. The population was a mix of free citizens, dependent workers, artisans, religious figures, and enslaved individuals. The economy depended on agriculture, especially barley. Massive irrigation projects fueled food production, but they also required large-scale organization and labor management. Failure to maintain these systems risked famine. Hammurabi had to take charge of daily administration almost immediately after becoming king, ensuring canals were cleared, taxes were collected, and temples remained supplied. If he failed, his authority would collapse. Economically, Babylon faced challenges. Trade routes were frequently disrupted by warfare among neighboring states. Merchants struggled to travel safely, and caravans risked raids and theft. Hammurabi recognized the importance of establishing legal consistency and public trust to rebuild commercial activity. From the beginning of his rule, he attempted to repair canal routes, strengthen river embankments, and encourage merchants to return to Babylonian markets. His awareness of economic fragility later shaped the sections of his law code dealing with contracts, interest rates, and professional accountability. Socially, Babylon was changing. New cultural influences entered the city as migrants arrived, bringing different languages and traditions. Hammurabi needed to prevent cultural conflict and maintain harmony within this expanding society. One of his early achievements was to restructure administrative authority. He appointed loyal governors, judges, and scribes to key positions, replacing corrupt or inefficient local leaders. These reforms strengthened central control, limiting the power of regional elites who might rebel against royal authority. Religiously, Babylon was rising in prestige. The cult of Marduk was becoming increasingly dominant, replacing older gods in symbolic importance. Hammurabi understood that religious unification could strengthen political unity. His later code repeatedly invokes divine authority, demonstrating that religion was inseparable from state governance. The temple not only functioned as a spiritual space, but as a bank, record keeper, and political center. The cooperation between Hammurabi and the priesthood helped secure legitimacy. When Hammurabi became king, his first years were cautious. He did not rush into war. Instead, he observed enemy weakness, strengthened internal administration, and forged diplomatic alliances. He improved infrastructure, supported agriculture, and built public trust. These early policies prevented rebellion and created stability. Babylon slowly transformed from a small kingdom into a respected regional power. By the end of Hammurabi's first decade as ruler, his neighbors no longer saw Babylon as insignificant. They recognized the rise of a strong leader capable of reshaping the political map of Mesopotamia. Hammurabi's ascension was not just the beginning of a reign, it was the turning point of Mesopotamian history. In his hands, Babylon would leave behind its status as a developing state and become the core of an empire that influenced law, economics, religion, and culture across centuries. During the initial stage of Hammurabi's government, a series of foundational policies shaped the direction of his rule. These developments reveal how Hammurabi's leadership philosophy evolved from inherited tradition into innovative statecraft. One of Hammurabi's earliest acts as king was to assert control over taxation. Babylonian taxes were not purely monetary. Most payments involved grain, livestock, or labor. Poor farmers owed harvest shares to temples or royal storehouses. Hammurabi instituted stricter oversight to prevent officials from abusing their authority. By punishing corrupt tax collectors and reassigning dishonest administrators, he strengthened loyalty among ordinary citizens. These reforms also helped ensure stable revenue, which funded military expansion and public works. Administrative record-keeping was another major area of early reform. Hammurabi supported scribal schools and expanded the use of cuneiform tablets for legal documentation. Administrative archives multiplied, allowing the state to track everything from livestock transactions to loan agreements. This emphasis on accountability became a cultural trademark of Babylon. Hammurabi recognized that accurate records prevented disputes and helped organize empire building. His law code later reflected these values by requiring written contracts for major business activity. Infrastructure upgrades played an essential role in Hammurabi's strategy. Mesopotamia depended on irrigation canals, and poorly maintained waterways could destroy an entire agricultural season. Hammurabi commissioned large-scale canal restoration projects, ensuring that fields received water at proper levels. This directly increased agricultural productivity and stabilized food supply. As a result, Babylon could support a larger population and a stronger military. These early projects demonstrated Hammurabi's understanding that prosperity depended not only on conquest, but also on internal investment. Hammurabi also developed policies to reduce crime and social disorder. Banditry had grown common along trade roads, threatening merchants who traveled between cities. Hammurabi ordered patrol systems, checkpoints, and protective outposts along major trade arteries. These measures rebuilt trust in the safety of Babylonian routes. Merchants returned, bringing silver, tin, luxury cloth, and foreign products. The economy grew, and social confidence increased. These early successes eventually encouraged Hammurabi to pursue greater political ambitions. Another remarkable achievement came from internal diplomacy. Rather than rule through brutality alone, Hammurabi listened to petitions from ordinary citizens. He sometimes canceled interest debts, redistributed agricultural land, and intervened personally in legal disputes. These acts produced loyalty and admiration. In a world where many kings ruled through intimidation, Hammurabi attempted moral leadership. The prologue of his future law code emphasizes this image, describing him as a shepherd guiding his people toward justice. By the end of Hammurabi's early administration period, Babylon had become a transformed kingdom. It was more stable, more prosperous, and more unified. The foundation was set for military campaigns that would soon reshape Mesopotamia. Festivals broke routine often. Babylonian religion required frequent ritual days tied to lunar cycles. meaning days off for many workers. On these days, families visited temples to offer sacrifices of bread, beer, animals, or oils. Priests read omens and blessed households. Justice formed another major aspect of everyday routine. People regularly visited officials to solve disputes. Contracts governed everything: marriage contracts, property sales, loan agreements, and partnership deals. Even simple tasks required legal clarity. Renting a donkey meant agreeing on terms, and scribes recorded details so courts could intervene if disagreements arose. Funerals and ancestor rituals were emotional community events. People mourned together, comforted families, and offered food to the deceased spirit. Food markets displayed impressive diversity: fresh fish from the river, beer flavored with dates, steamed barley dumplings, cheeses, honey cakes, vegetables, and fruits. Beer was a daily necessity, consumed across all classes. Wages and professional fees often involved standard beer measurements. Urban security was constantly maintained. Guards patrolled city gates, checking identification seals and shipments. Night watchmen ensured thieves remained controlled. Urban rule depended on these protections. Without them, crime could destroy trust. Life in Hammurabi's Babylon was lively, communal, spiritual, challenging, and full of meaning. Homes and neighborhoods were microcosms of empire, structured yet varied, traditional yet dynamic. These living spaces made Hammurabi's laws visible, not abstract words carved in stone, but everyday tools shaping real relationships. Architecture in Hammurabi's empire expressed power, religion, identity, and engineering talent. Though the archaeological record from Hammurabi's era is incomplete, later Babylonian architecture offers a clear window into traditions that began in his time. Later victories were not the result of luck. They were built on these early reforms, which strengthened Babylonian identity, encouraged economic growth, and established Hammurabi as a wise and strategic leader. The early phase of his kingship reveals that Hammurabi was not simply a conqueror or a lawgiver, but a visionary who understood the importance of planning, justice, and public trust. By the time Hammurabi completed the foundational internal reforms of his early reign, Babylon stood ready to transform from a developing city-state into a powerful regional force. This transformation required military strength, diplomatic finesse, and administrative precision. Hammurabi understood that empires are never built overnight. Preparation must precede conquest. For years, he strengthened Babylon's agricultural and economic infrastructure because he knew an army cannot march if fields are empty or population starved. Food stores created security, and tax organization ensured soldiers could be fed, equipped, and paid. These foundations gave Babylon the stability necessary for expansion. Hammurabi reorganized the military, transforming what had been a modest defensive force into a disciplined offensive unit. Soldiers were trained in tight formations and battlefield communication. Babylonian warriors learned to use composite bows and bronze weaponry more effectively than many neighboring rivals. Chariots became crucial military tools, enabling rapid movement in open terrain. Babylon also learned siege tactics against walled cities, using battering rams, fire, and starvation strategies to break defenses. Hammurabi relied not only on brute power, but on calculation. His campaigns were planned around seasonal river levels and agricultural cycles. He avoided war during flooding seasons when movement was impossible. Diplomacy served as an additional weapon. Before Hammurabi began major conquests, he signed alliances with neighboring powers. These early relationships strengthened Babylon's political standing and allowed Hammurabi to gather intelligence on rival states. Through marriage arrangements, treaties, and trade agreements, he built networks of trust, often temporary, yet strategically useful. The Kingdom of Mari provided trade access and information about political developments in Syria, while small city-states along the Euphrates learned to depend on Babylonian economic protection. Hammurabi also positioned himself as a moral ruler. He claimed he fought not for personal glory, but to bring justice to the oppressed and stability to the region. This image helped him secure support among local elites, priests, and common people living in nearby territories. When Babylon eventually conquered these regions, resistance was often weaker than expected because Hammurabi had already built respect before arrival. The stage was finally set for Babylon to rise as a conquering state. Hammurabi moved from quiet preparation to confident expansion. He inherited a world filled with political rivalry, but unlike many ancient kings who acted impulsively, Hammurabi approached empire building with patience, administrative strength, military discipline, and cultural awareness. His preparations show that the success of Babylon was not an accident. It was a master plan years in the making. Once Babylon had achieved internal unity and stable administration, Hammurabi initiated his early military operations. These first campaigns were not focused on massive conquest, but on strategic positioning. Hammurabi knew that reckless war could destroy the fragile stability he worked to build. Instead, he targeted smaller regions that posed immediate threats or controlled essential resources. One of his initial conflicts involved skirmishes against Elamite forces to the east, who had harassed Babylonian territories. Through a combination of warfare and negotiation, Hammurabi forced them to retreat, gaining respect from neighboring states. Meanwhile, the alliance between Babylon and Mari played a central part in early success. Mari controlled crucial trade routes linking Mesopotamia with Syria and Anatolia. Instead of attacking Mari, Hammurabi supported friendly relations with its king, Zimri-Lim. Their cooperation allowed Babylon to expand influence westward without direct conflict. While Hammurabi was strengthening diplomatic alliances, he also used military pressure against isolated states like Rim-Sin of Larsa, who had long dominated southern Mesopotamia. Larsa controlled fertile regions and river systems critical to agricultural production. Hammurabi saw that taking Larsa could double Babylon's strength, but he did not act immediately. He waited until Larsa became politically unstable. Throughout these campaigns, Hammurabi demonstrated remarkable psychological understanding. He allowed rival kingdoms to weaken each other through warfare before stepping in to take control of exhausted territories. This approach reduced Babylonian casualties and preserved resources. Hammurabi also applied economic warfare, using trade restrictions and taxation control to slowly erode enemy strength. Another essential aspect of Hammurabi's approach was careful messaging. Where other kings bragged about bloodshed, Hammurabi emphasized law and fairness. He portrayed his military actions as necessary steps to protect divine justice. This ideological framing had a powerful diplomatic effect. Cities reluctant to fight Babylon believed Hammurabi might treat them justly if they surrendered. During this time, Hammurabi used scribes to record military achievements and distribute messages across conquered territories. His written declarations announced peace conditions, tax agreements, and rights for citizens living under Babylonian rule. These documents created a sense of administrative legitimacy, turning conquest into governance. These early campaigns did not yet create a full empire, but they laid the moral, military, and political groundwork for one. Babylon emerged not merely as a violent aggressor, but as a powerful state guided by structure, strategy, and diplomacy. Hammurabi's reputation grew. He was respected, feared, admired, and analyzed by friends and enemies alike. The atmosphere was shifting. Hammurabi was preparing for the greatest expansion Mesopotamia had ever witnessed. By Hammurabi's middle reign, the diplomatic balance of Mesopotamia began to change dramatically. The alliances that once held regional powers together started breaking apart. Larsa, Mari, and Eshnunna found themselves weakened by internal conflict, rival invasions, and economic decline. Hammurabi sensed opportunity. A king who waited patiently was now ready to strike decisively. His most famous military success was the defeat of Rim-Sin of Larsa. Rim-Sin had ruled for decades and believed his city was untouchable. But after years of tension, Hammurabi launched a sweeping campaign that overwhelmed Larsa's armies and forced Rimsin into surrender. With Larsa under Babylonian control, Hammurabi gained access to rich farmland, large population centers, and important religious cities. The conquest of Larsa changed everything. Babylon was no longer an ambitious city-state. It was becoming the central force of southern Mesopotamia. But Hammurabi did not stop there. As rival powers watched Larsa fall, fear spread. The kingdom of Mari, once an ally, now appeared too powerful to ignore. Hammurabi recognized that alliances are temporary and friends may become threats. When political circumstances shifted, he invaded Mari, capturing the city and integrating its territories. This decisive move secured trade routes stretching deep into Syria. Babylon now controlled international commerce flowing along the Euphrates River. Next came Eshnunna, a kingdom to the east with strong military traditions. Hammurabi used both force and negotiation, eventually occupying the region and eliminating its leadership. Finally, Hammurabi challenged Assyrian forces to the north. Instead of open war, Assyria submitted to Babylonian authority, paying tribute and accepting Hammurabi's dominance. The empire that emerged was one of the largest Mesopotamia had seen. Babylon controlled land from the Persian Gulf in the south to the mountainous regions of northern Mesopotamia. The population included countless cultural groups: Sumerians, Akkadians, Amorites, Hurrians, and more. Maintaining peace across such diversity required a unifying legal system. Hammurabi realized that military conquest alone could not preserve his achievements. He needed laws that reached across differences and bound people to a shared identity. The world stood at a turning point. Hammurabi had forged an empire from calculated war, economic restructuring, and extraordinary leadership. The next step would define history: the creation of the Code of Hammurabi, a system of written justice that would outlive kings, empires, and civilizations. What began as a military empire would evolve into a cultural legacy lasting thousands of years. To truly understand the Code of Hammurabi and the empire he ruled, one must imagine the world his people lived in. Babylon during Hammurabi's lifetime was a bustling, diverse, noisy, crowded, and vibrant city filled with movement day and night. Its streets were narrow and winding, with houses built close together. People from many lands spoke different languages, traded goods, worshipped various gods, and interacted inside the markets, temples, and administrative centers. Babylon sat beside the Euphrates River, and water shaped every aspect of life. It fed crops, powered industry, and moved boats that carried people and products across the kingdom. Most Babylonians lived in mud brick houses with flat roofs, which families used for sleeping during hot summer nights. Indoors, rooms revolved around a central courtyard where meals were cooked and shared. Food depended on class and wealth. Farmers and laborers ate barley cakes, dates, onions, leeks, and lentils, while wealthier families enjoyed beer made from barley, meats like lamb and beef, and fish from the river. Markets offered spices from distant lands, fabrics dyed in bright colors, and tools crafted by skilled artisans. City life was filled with smells of clay ovens, livestock, perfume oils, and incense burning inside temples. Work shaped identity. Farmers formed the backbone of society. They controlled plows, irrigation channels, and grain storage. Their lives were ruled by the seasons: planting in autumn, irrigating through winter, harvesting in spring, and preparing land during the hot summer months. Overseeing this agricultural world were scribes, who measured fields, recorded taxes, and ensured fairness. Their job required literacy in cuneiform, making them part of an elite class. Craftsmen worked with metals, wood, leather, and textiles, creating tools, clothing, pottery, and weapons. Bakers woke before sunrise, soldiers trained in barracks, and merchants traveled for months to distant towns to return with tin, cedar, and gemstones. Religious identity shaped everyday behavior. People prayed at household altars and visited large temples during festivals. Babylonian religion emphasized cosmic order, and priests interpreted messages from the gods through dreams, omens, and astronomical observation. Temple complexes stored food and gold, provided loans, organized labor, and employed thousands. Society blended spirituality and practicality. Religion justified government decisions, encouraged moral behavior, and gave people emotional comfort in unpredictable times. Women played important roles in this world. Though Hammurabi's society was patriarchal, women could own property, run businesses, and demand legal protection. Some served as priestesses, scribes, or tavern keepers. Daughters received dowries to prepare for marriage. But if a husband mistreated his wife, she could appeal to law. Such protections show Hammurabi's society was complex, structured by class and gender, but not entirely oppressive. Slavery existed, but it functioned differently than later Roman or American systems. Many slaves could marry free citizens, buy their freedom, or work as skilled laborers. Some were enslaved due to debt, others through war. Hammurabi addressed their rights in his laws, proving that even the lowest populations were recognized by the state. Daily life also contained entertainment. Music was central to culture, with harps, drums, and flutes used in celebrations. Workers told stories after sunset. Children played with clay toys or practiced reading in schools, and elders shared wisdom through proverbs. The city also hosted festivals honoring gods such as Marduk, where crowds gathered to cheer, feast, and share gifts. Life in Hammurabi's Babylon was not easy. Diseases spread quickly, drought threatened crops, bandits lurked outside city walls, and war always loomed near. Yet, society continued to flourish because Babylon remained organized under a powerful king who built canals, supported agriculture, and enforced justice. Every person, from the richest merchant to the poorest farmer, lived with the awareness that they were part of something larger, a civilization guided by written law. The structure of Babylonian society under Hammurabi was built on layered social identity. Understanding these classes is essential to understanding why the Code of Hammurabi was written in the way it was. Babylon was not a society built on absolute equality. Instead, it was designed around responsibility, order, and stability. Hammurabi inherited a deeply traditional social hierarchy stretching back centuries. And while he did not dismantle it, he reshaped it to function more effectively within his empire. At the top stood the king. Hammurabi claimed divine appointment from the gods and held absolute authority. His words shaped law, war, religious policy, taxation, and justice. The king was followed by a powerful priest class who managed temples, conducted rituals, and interpreted omens. Temples controlled massive amounts of land and wealth, giving priests significant influence. Yet Hammurabi balanced their power carefully. His laws ensured that priests could not take advantage of citizens or abuse their position. The next social group included nobles and high officials, military commanders, wealthy landowners, and administrators who held government positions. They owned fields, hired workers, and oversaw regional courts. Their knowledge of literacy, law, and administration made them indispensable. Yet they remained loyal to the king because their positions depended on his favor. Below them were free commoners, farmers, artisans, laborers, merchants, and scribes. These individuals formed the largest population group and held varying degrees of wealth and privilege. Some owned land, others rented fields, and many depended on seasonal wages. Even within this class existed hierarchy. A scribe was far more respected than a field worker, while merchants with successful trade networks could become wealthier than nobles. Hammurabi's laws protected their property and family rights, promoting economic stability. Beneath commoners were dependents, people who worked on land owned by nobles or temples. They were not enslaved, but were obligated to produce labor or goods as part of a contract. Many temple workers belonged to this category, providing agricultural output, textile production, or administrative assistance. At the bottom of society were slaves. But slavery under Hammurabi differed significantly from later brutal systems. Slaves were protected by law from extreme abuse, could own property, and could purchase freedom. Many were skilled workers who served as accountants, managers, or craftsmen. Debt slavery was common. People unable to repay loans temporarily surrendered themselves or their children to labor service. The law limited this period to ensure slavery did not become permanent for debtors. Marriage and family life also reflected hierarchy. Fathers controlled households, yet marriage contracts gave wives rights to property, divorce, and inheritance. If a husband neglected or abused his wife, she could seek judgment before officials. Children inherited status from parents. Sons of nobles became nobles, while daughters often received valuable dowries to secure their future. Economic class mattered deeply inside the legal system. Hammurabi shaped his code to deliver justice differently depending on social rank. For example, an assault committed against a nobleman required harsher punishment than the same assault against a commoner. Some modern readers view this inequality negatively, but Hammurabi believed that treating each class differently maintained balance and prevented rebellion. Class mobility existed, though rarely. A talented artisan could become a high-ranking official. Wealthy merchants could marry into noble families, and freed slaves could achieve economic success. Babylon was rigid, but not entirely frozen. These social structures explain why Hammurabi needed a written legal system. The empire contained people of different wealth, backgrounds, languages, and identities. Without clear laws, conflict would erupt, corruption would spread, and regional leaders might challenge the king. Hammurabi's social hierarchy was not merely tradition. It was the skeleton on which the empire stood. Written law acted as muscle and skin, holding the body together. Religious belief was the psychological glue that held Babylonian society together. Under Hammurabi, religion did not function separately from government. It shaped law, justice, economy, and identity. The Code of Hammurabi begins with the statement that the gods chose Hammurabi to bring justice to the land. This declaration was not propaganda alone. It reflected a worldview in which kingship and divine were inseparable. People believed that gods influenced daily events, controlled weather, brought disease, protected cities, and punished wrongdoing. Temples served as spiritual centers, economic engines, and administrative offices. Priests performed sacrifices, read omens, and interpreted messages from the gods. Clay tablets show that astronomical records, agricultural calendars, and predictions were produced in temple schools. People visited priests for advice, cures, blessings, and judgment. Major temples like Esagila in Babylon honored Marduk, whose rising importance paralleled Babylon's political rise. Hammurabi promoted Marduk as the chief god of Mesopotamia, helping unify the empire religiously. Moral identity came from mythology and storytelling. Tales of gods and heroes taught values such as loyalty, respect, wisdom, and courage. Children learned proverbs about fairness in school, and adults repeated them at home and work. These teachings matched Hammurabi's belief that law must reflect cultural values. His code constantly referenced concepts like honesty in business, responsibility in family life, and accountability in public duty. Festivals reinforced cultural unity. Buildings were symbolic structures that communicated social meaning. Palaces told citizens that royalty ruled with authority. Temples reminded them of their gods. Walls declared safety and strength. Temples were monumental complexes built on platforms and arranged around courtyards. Their walls were decorated with molded brick patterns and sometimes glazed surfaces. Inside, there were storerooms for grain, treasure rooms, bakery sections for ceremonial breads, and libraries for sacred texts. Ritual incense filled rooms, creating spiritual atmosphere. Priests managed enormous administrative tasks from within temple corridors, collecting grain taxes, storing silver, and supervising craftsmen. Ziggurats rose above temples, symbolizing a link to divine realms. These structures consisted of multiple step platforms, each smaller than the one beneath it. Staircases and ramps climbed the outside surface. At the top stood a shrine believed to house the presence of the god. Though Hammurabi's ziggurat lacked the later grandeur of Nebuchadnezzar's, its existence represented a monumental achievement of building technology. Palaces served as centerpieces of power. Though fewer palace structures survive from Hammurabi's era compared to Mari's famous palace, written texts describe large residence compounds, meeting halls, and administrative rooms. Hammurabi's palace functioned like both government headquarters and cultural stage. Scribes recorded documents inside, messengers arrived with reports, and governors met for instructions. Walls may have displayed painted scenes showing Hammurabi's victories or his relationship with the gods. Public monuments included statues, stelae, and sculpted boundary stones. The most famous example, the Code of Hammurabi stele, stood publicly for citizens to read. Other stelae described battles, territorial claims, or building projects. Sculptures depicted kings as warriors, priests, or shepherds, depending on intended message. Religious celebrations included music, dance, feasting, and public ceremonies. During the New Year festival, statues of gods were carried through streets while crowds cheered, prayed, and celebrated. These events reminded citizens that they belonged to a shared community. Individuals who barely understood each other's languages could still worship together. Burial rituals demonstrated reverence for ancestors. People believed spirits remained active after death, influencing the living. Families cleaned graves, left offerings, and spoke prayers to ensure peace for departed relatives. Such rituals strengthened family bonds and gave meaning to suffering. Education was tied to religion. Scribes trained in temple schools, copying historical texts, religious hymns, and legal documents. Literacy provided entry into elite careers. Because education was so connected to religion, knowledge gained spiritual weight. Religious belief also served as psychological comfort. Floods, famine, and war were constant dangers. People prayed for protection and forgiveness, believing suffering meant the gods were displeased. Hammurabi's laws used divine authority to discourage crime. Breaking a contract was not just illegal, it was sinful. The moral power of religion made his code functional, because citizens believed justice came from the gods, not merely the government. Cultural identity in Hammurabi's empire blended Sumerian and Akkadian traditions. People wrote in Akkadian, but used Sumerian for sacred rituals. Hymns were sung in both languages, and scribes learned bilingual vocabulary lists. Cultural continuity gave stability to a rapidly changing empire. By shaping a religious and cultural identity that transcended local loyalties, Hammurabi united different populations into a shared world. Without this cultural unification, law alone could not hold the empire together. The spiritual fabric of the empire allowed Hammurabi to expand territory, administer justice, and maintain order even among people who had never seen him. Religion and culture transformed Babylon into more than a political power. It became a civilization. Hammurabi's most famous accomplishment, the creation of his law code, did not appear suddenly or without purpose. It emerged from the complex reality of ruling a vast and diverse empire filled with people of different languages, customs, and economic backgrounds. Before Hammurabi's reign, Mesopotamia had laws, but they were scattered across local regions and often passed orally from generation to generation. This system allowed corruption and inconsistency to flourish. A man in Larsa might face a very different punishment than a man in Babylon for the same crime. Not because the crime was different, but because legal decisions depended on local customs or the judgment of individual officials. Hammurabi saw this lack of uniformity as a threat to social order, and his desire to create a unified legal identity for his expanding empire became a driving force behind the code. Another major reason Hammurabi created his law code was political legitimacy. After conquering many rival territories, he needed to prove that Babylonian rule was not simply military domination. If conquered cities believed they were treated fairly, rebellion would decrease and loyalty would increase. Hammurabi understood that when subjects feel protected under just laws, they are more willing to accept new authority. His legal project served as an ideological message. Babylon stood for civilization, fairness, and stability, not merely conquest. In this way, the code became a tool of diplomacy as well as government. Economic development also played a powerful role. Babylon's booming economy required regulation. Merchants traveled long distances carrying valuable goods, so they needed legal assurances that contracts would be honored. Farmers depended on shared canals and irrigation systems, so laws were needed to define responsibility and prevent disasters caused by neglect. Builders, sailors, shepherds, and craftsmen all required professional standards to prevent fraud and ensure quality. Hammurabi's empire contained every type of economic activity imaginable, and he realized that writing and preserving laws protected commerce. Religion further motivated Hammurabi to write his code. Mesopotamians believed the gods created order out of chaos, and that kings existed to maintain that divine harmony. Hammurabi claimed Shamash, the sun god of justice, commanded him to create a legal system that prevented exploitation and protected the weak. This divine framing did not only shape belief, it shaped the legal content itself. Many laws reflect moral values rooted in religious teachings: honesty, responsibility, and respect for authority. Writing the laws in stone transformed them into sacred truth. Additionally, Hammurabi sought to make justice visible and accessible. Before his rule, many people could not access legal protection because decisions were hidden inside elite institutions or controlled by wealthy families. Hammurabi changed this dynamic by carving his laws into a large stone monument and placing it publicly where any literate person could read, or where any citizen could hear a reading. Though literacy was limited, public display meant that judges and officials could no longer pretend ignorance or alter decisions based on bribery or influence. Finally, Hammurabi knew his empire would outlive him. Kings who conquered through war alone often saw their empires collapse when they died. Hammurabi wanted his legacy to endure. Laws carved into stone were a message to the future. Remember me not only because I conquered armies, but because I built justice. This ambition created one of history's greatest achievements, a legal document that guided human law for thousands of years. The decision to create the Code of Hammurabi was therefore an extraordinary mixture of religion, politics, economics, social philosophy, and long-term vision. His legal system would shape human civilization long after Babylon fell, proving that written law has the power to define destiny. Creating the Code of Hammurabi was not a simple task. It required gathering legal traditions from multiple regions, analyzing court cases, reviewing old law codes, listening to public complaints, and shaping these materials into a uniform system. Scholars believe that Hammurabi worked closely with scribes, priests, and legal scholars to ensure the code covered every major aspect of society. The writing process happened on clay tablets long before the final text was carved on stone. This drafting phase allowed Hammurabi to organize the laws logically, ensuring each rule flowed into the next without confusion. The code contains 282 individual laws, each addressing specific circumstances. These laws do not appear in random order. They begin with topics such as court proceedings and accusations, establishing how judges must behave and how evidence must be examined. Next, the laws move into family matters, marriage, divorce, inheritance, and adoption. From there, they address economic issues, wages, professional contracts, and commercial transactions. Later sections cover agriculture, irrigation, livestock management, real estate, and rental agreements. Toward the end, the laws address violent crime, assault, and murder. This structure shows careful planning. Hammurabi was building not just a list of punishments, but a complete blueprint for society. The decision to inscribe the code in stone reflects enormous effort. The monument, called a stele, stood nearly 7 feet tall and weighed several tons. Its surface had to be polished, prepared, and carved with precision so future generations could read the text. At the top of the stele, Hammurabi is depicted receiving authority from the god Shamash, symbolizing divine approval. Below this image, thousands of cuneiform characters line the surface. The text is written in Akkadian language using cuneiform script, making it readable to Babylonian scribes across the empire. Placing the stele in a public temple was essential to Hammurabi's vision. People entering the holy site would see the laws, reinforcing moral behavior and reminding officials that justice must follow written rules. Public display allowed Hammurabi to communicate with citizens he would never meet in person. It was a message carved into time, declaring that no matter one's wealth, heritage, or occupation, the law applied to everyone within the empire. Judges could be punished for corruption. Merchants who cheated customers faced fines, or worse, and elite landowners could not exploit the poor without consequence. Scholars believe multiple copies of the code existed on clay tablets, distributed across cities so local courts could reference them. Written law demanded literacy, and this requirement strengthened Babylon's scribal institutions. Schools became more important than ever, training new generations of officials capable of reading and enforcing the law. This process standardized education and further united the empire. The writing style of the code was strict and formal. Most laws followed an if, then format. If someone commits a certain action, then a specific punishment or resolution occurs. This formula created fairness because individuals knew outcomes in advance. For example, if a builder constructed a house that collapsed and caused death, the builder was executed. Though harsh by modern standards, this rule protected lives and emphasized responsibility. It was not cruelty, it was accountability. The process of writing and presenting the Code of Hammurabi demonstrates not only administrative skill, but cultural ambition. Hammurabi wanted to elevate Babylon from a regional empire into a civilization of law. By turning tradition into text, he preserved justice against time, memory, and corruption. The Code of Hammurabi reveals profound insights into the ethical worldview of Babylonian society. At first glance, modern readers notice its severity. Many laws prescribe death for crimes such as robbery, false accusation, and negligence. Others require mutilation as punishment, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. However, to understand Hammurabi's justice, we must view these rules within their historical context. In a world without prisons, police forces, or forensic science, punishment needed to be strong enough to deter crime and maintain public safety. Harsh consequences were meant to prevent chaos, not encourage brutality. More importantly, the code shows a powerful commitment to fairness. The idea of proportional justice, where punishment reflects the seriousness of the crime, was revolutionary. Before Hammurabi, justice often depended on wealth or social status. If a rich man harmed a poor man, the poor victim might receive no justice at all. Hammurabi attempted to prevent this by establishing written standards. Even though his laws recognized class differences, they still demanded responsibility from the wealthy. A nobleman who injured another nobleman suffered equal physical retaliation. A corrupt judge could be removed from office, and a merchant who tried to cheat another lost his profits. The code also protected vulnerable groups. Several laws defend widows, orphans, and the poor. Hammurabi believed that society must safeguard people without political influence. Children adopted into wealthy households receive inheritance rights. Enslaved individuals could earn freedom, and women gained legal protection against abuse. These laws reveal compassion alongside authority. Ethical values appear repeatedly: honesty in trade, responsibility in construction, loyalty in marriage, and fairness in contracts. Hammurabi understood that social trust required rules. If a doctor performed surgery that resulted in death through negligence, he could be punished severely. While this appears extreme today, it shows how early societies valued human life and medical responsibility. Religious ethics shaped legal thinking. Since Hammurabi believed justice came from Shamash, the laws serve as moral instruction, not only governmental decree. Violating the law meant offending the gods. This belief gave the code emotional weight. People obeyed not simply because they feared punishment, but because they believed obedience was righteous. The code also reveals philosophical ideas about responsibility and personal agency. Many laws deal with negligence rather than intentional harm. If a man failed to secure a dangerous bull and the bull killed someone, the owner bore responsibility. This concept demonstrated understanding that harm could come through carelessness as well as intent. The Code of Hammurabi was not only retributive, it was restorative. Many laws allowed financial compensation instead of physical punishment, especially for lower-class disputes. This reveals that Babylonian society valued stability more than vengeance. In the larger arc of history, Hammurabi's legal achievements shaped future civilizations. Greek, Roman, Hebrew, and Islamic legal systems echo themes found in his code: proportional justice, public display of laws, and accountability of rulers. Even modern constitutions reflect Hammurabi's belief that law must protect citizens from corruption and inequality. Thus, the Code of Hammurabi stands as one of humanity's earliest ethical monuments. It reflects a society that understood power must be balanced with responsibility. Justice must be visible and consistent, and law must serve the community as well as the ruler. Hammurabi transformed justice from a private privilege into a public right. To understand how Hammurabi's code actually functioned in real life, we must look inside the courtrooms of Babylon. Law in Hammurabi's empire did not exist as symbolic text alone. It actively shaped court procedures, judge responsibilities, and justice outcomes. Babylonian courtrooms were public spaces, often located near temples or administrative buildings. Citizens, merchants, travelers, and officials gathered to participate or observe, proving that law served not only as punishment, but also as a public performance of justice. Judges under Hammurabi carried immense responsibility. They were trained scribes capable of reading the code, interpreting evidence, writing legal records, and issuing sentences. Judicial authority was not arbitrary. Hammurabi's code made it clear that judges who accepted bribes or issued false rulings could be removed from office, fined, or publicly shamed. This approach demonstrated Hammurabi's determination to reduce corruption. Prior to written law, judges held nearly unlimited personal decision-making power, which often led to inconsistent verdicts. Hammurabi changed this by standardizing justice, reducing the influence of wealthy citizens, and giving ordinary people stronger legal protection. Court procedures were formal and structured. When someone accused another of wrongdoing, the case began with an oath. Both accuser and defendant swore before the gods that they spoke truth. Because the Mesopotamians believed divine punishment could strike liars, oaths held extreme weight. Witnesses also played a major role. Testimony from neighbors, family, or business partners could determine verdicts. In some cases, documents such as contracts or debt agreements were presented as evidence. Because writing had been spreading for centuries, Babylonian courts used clay tablets to record marriages, property transfers, loans, and employment contracts. These documents strengthened legal certainty. Trials were not always simple. In situations lacking evidence, the river ordeal might be used. An accused person was ordered to jump into the river. If he survived, the gods had proven his innocence. If he drowned, guilt was assumed. While this method sounds brutal today, it reflected deep belief in divine justice. The ordeal was rare, used only when no other path existed. Judges were expected to consider class identity during sentencing. Hammurabi's code clearly separated penalties for crimes committed by nobles, commoners, and slaves. If a noble injured another noble, physical retaliation was allowed, an eye for an eye. But if the same injury was inflicted upon a commoner, financial compensation replaced mutilation. Though unequal, this system tried to maintain balance between deterrence and economic practicality. Courts also handled business disputes. Merchants could sue for unpaid debts, missing cargo, or stolen goods. If a trader loaned silver to a farmer and the farmer lost his harvest to natural disaster, Hammurabi designed protections to prevent unfair ruin. Laws allowed temporary cancellation or adjustment of payments, proving Babylonian justice contained compassion as well as control. Divorce cases, inheritance arguments, and child custody decisions all passed through formal courts. Hammurabi believed family relationships needed legal protection. If a husband falsely accused his wife of adultery, the law supported her innocence and punished him. If parents died, guardianship rules protected children's inheritance. Ultimately, the courtroom under Hammurabi served as the heart of social order. People trusted the system because they believed laws came directly from divine authority. Judges acted as guardians of cosmic justice, and the written code ensured that judgment was not random. Babylonian law thus transformed daily life. The courtroom was no longer a space for personal vengeance. It became a stage where structured justice unfolded. Family structure was central to Hammurabi's society, and the code contains many laws that defined how people married, raised children, shared property, and passed wealth through generations. Without these rules, family life in an empire as large as Babylon would have collapsed under disorder. Hammurabi believed that strong families produced strong communities, and his legal system protected marriage contracts, inheritance rights, and domestic stability. Marriage in Babylon was not simply romantic union. It was a formal legal contract involving families, property exchanges, and social obligations. Dowries accompanied weddings, financial or material gifts presented by the bride's family to the groom. Dowries remained the property of the wife and were a safety net if a marriage ended. Hammurabi's code protected dowries from being stolen, misused, or hidden. If a husband tried to seize his wife's dowry unlawfully, courts intervened. Adultery was treated differently depending on circumstances. If a wife knowingly committed adultery, the punishment could be severe, including execution. However, contrary to modern belief, women were not the only ones punished. If a man committed adultery and his actions harmed another household, penalties could also strike him. Hammurabi recognized that family honor affected social stability, so marriage rules were strict. But the code also recognized false accusation. If a husband wrongly accused his wife of infidelity, she was protected by law and he faced consequences. Divorce laws revealed surprising fairness. If a husband wanted to leave his wife without cause, he had to compensate her financially. She received her dowry and possibly additional wealth to prevent poverty. Infrastructure formed another major architectural domain. Hammurabi built and restored bridges, canal gates, embankments, and roads. These were architectural feats essential to the empire's survival. Without strong canals, farms died. Without roads, merchants stopped traveling. Without bridges, communication failed. Private homes represented variation in wealth. Some had painted walls, decorated tiles, and carved furniture. Others remained plain but functional. Bathrooms consisted of clay basins and drainage channels. Kitchens contained clay ovens and large storage vessels embedded into floors. Urban planning incorporated religious symbolism. Temples sat in central zones to reflect spiritual authority. Streets leading to temples often aligned with astronomical directions, showing mathematical understanding. Babylonian builders used mathematics and geometry to orient foundations, ensuring stability. They measured clay brick dimensions carefully to standardize construction. Brick molds ensured uniformity. Workers plastered walls to protect structures from water damage. Architecture served ideology. Babylonian cities projected the empire's values outward. Temples represented cosmic order, palaces showed political unity, and public monuments displayed cultural pride. When Hammurabi died, later kings continued these architectural traditions, proving their lasting influence. These city structures made Babylon a cultural capital. Foreign visitors who entered its gates saw a kingdom that valued beauty, organization, and spiritual grandeur. Architecture helped transform Hammurabi's empire into a civilization recognizable for thousands of years. Education in Babylon under Hammurabi did not resemble modern classrooms, yet it served a similar purpose: to transmit knowledge, preserve cultural memory, and produce skilled administrators. If a woman wanted divorce because she was abused or neglected, she could appeal to judges. If her claims were proven true, she gained freedom and financial support. This shows the code was more humane than many assume. Inheritance laws ensured wealth transferred clearly between generations. Sons inherited family land, but daughters also received legal dowry rights. If a father died, the mother became administrator of family property until sons matured. If no sons existed, daughters could inherit directly. Adoption laws protected children without parents. Adopted sons received equal inheritance unless fraud occurred. The code also discussed household servants and enslaved individuals. Slaves could marry free people, own property, and sometimes buy freedom. If a master killed a slave without cause, he could face penalties. Childhood safety was protected too. Laws punished negligence. If a caregiver allowed harm to come to a child, financial compensation or exile could result. The code made family loyalty a legal duty. Children were expected to respect parents, and neglect of elderly family members could lead to legal punishment. The ideal Babylonian family was not built on affection alone. It was structured by legal responsibility. These family laws show Hammurabi's remarkable awareness of social dynamics. He knew the empire could not survive on war and economy alone. Stability depended on homes functioning well. His laws protected women more than many later societies would, safeguarded children, regulated marriage contracts, and provided legal care for vulnerable individuals. In doing so, Hammurabi helped shape early legal thinking that family rights are essential to social justice. His rules echo through later civilizations, influencing Roman marriage law, Christian inheritance practice, and even modern courts dealing with divorce, adoption, and custody. The economic system under Hammurabi's empire was one of the most advanced in the ancient world, and the Code of Hammurabi played a central role in shaping how labor, wages, and trade were conducted. With agriculture as the foundation of life, Babylonian economy depended on fair distribution of land and irrigation water. Hammurabi wrote laws to prevent agricultural disaster and ensure that farming families could survive. If a farmer neglected canals causing neighbors' fields to flood, he was legally required to compensate them from his own harvest. If drought ruined crops, debts were reduced to avoid total collapse. This revealed an understanding that economic systems must balance profit with survival. Wage control was another major feature. Hammurabi established fixed wages for workers: plowmen, shepherds, ox drivers, harvesters, builders, and surgeons. This prevented employers from exploiting desperate laborers by forcing unfair pay or tricking them through contracts. On the other side, workers who accepted wages were required to fulfill obligations honestly. If a hired shepherd stole sheep, he faced harsh punishment. The law aimed to protect both business owners and laborers. Professional responsibility defined Babylon's business world. Builders faced some of the harshest accountability laws in the code. If a house they constructed collapsed and killed someone, the builder could be executed. Though extreme, this rule prevented corruption in building projects, encouraged safe construction, and protected families living inside homes. Doctors also faced strong standards. For successful surgery, they earned high fees. For failed surgery caused by negligence, they faced financial ruin or mutilation. This system rewarded skill and punished incompetence. Merchants played a significant role in Babylon's economy. They transported goods along caravan routes that stretched across deserts and mountains. Hammurabi created clear commercial guidelines. Merchants had to document their goods, calculate interest rates fairly, and use standardized weights and measures. Fraud in commerce was punished severely because trust kept the market alive. Loan regulation was essential. Many farmers borrowed seed or tools to plant crops. If harvests failed, The code prevented lenders from permanently enslaving borrowers. Repayment terms could adjust, giving farmers a chance to rebuild. This prevented financial collapse across rural regions. The code also protected property rights. Theft was punished harshly because stealing livestock, tools, or goods could cripple families. Yet Hammurabi recognized the complexity of theft. If stolen property was found in someone's house, courts investigated carefully to determine guilt rather than assuming possession proved crime. Marketplaces in Babylon reflected this legal structure. Vendors sold bread, beer, oil, and textiles under government inspection. Tavern keepers, often women, operated under licensing rules. If they cheated customers by watering down beer or hiding illegal activity, they faced punishment. Hammurabi knew that marketplaces were cultural centers where rumor, gossip, and information flowed. Therefore, keeping markets honest helped preserve the empire's moral identity. Hammurabi's economic laws reveal a society that understood fairness not as idealism, but as practical necessity. Without written regulation, wealthy elites could manipulate prices, exploit laborers, and hoard land. Hammurabi's legal oversight stabilized economic life, making Babylon one of the wealthiest civilizations of the ancient world. In modern terms, Hammurabi's code resembles a mixture of constitutional law, labor law, business ethics, and consumer protection. It taught future civilizations that economies cannot survive without justice, standards, and accountability. Through his legal vision, Hammurabi not only fed his empire, he built a system where wealth supported social stability and labor was valued as the foundation of civilization. Hammurabi's success as a conqueror was not simply the result of his intelligence or diplomatic skill. It also depended upon the structure and strength of his military machine. The Babylonian army under Hammurabi was a complex institution that blended old Mesopotamian traditions with new ideas. Before Hammurabi, armies in the region usually consisted of temporary levies. Farmers were called to war during planting or harvesting breaks, then returned home once a campaign ended. Hammurabi changed that system by professionalizing and organizing military service more rigorously. He built an army capable of strategic warfare, prolonged sieges, and defensive protection across enormous territories. Training of soldiers became a major priority. Babylonian troops drilled with bows, spears, axes, maces, daggers, and sickle-shaped swords. They learned to march in formation, hold shield walls, and maneuver in desert terrain. Hammurabi encouraged archery because the composite bow gave Babylonian soldiers impressive range and power. These bows, made from wood, sinew, and horn, launched arrows capable of penetrating armor at great distances. Meanwhile, infantry carried rectangular shields covered in leather and supported by wooden frames. Their armor varied according to rank. Some soldiers wore bronze helmets and chest plates. Others fought without armor due to heat and cost. Training ensured discipline, preventing panic on the battlefield. Chariot forces added speed and shock value. Babylonian chariots typically carried 2 soldiers, a driver and a warrior armed with javelins or bows. Chariots functioned like early tanks, fast, terrifying, and able to break enemy lines. Hammurabi placed great importance on chariot mobility, often using them to strike flanks or chase retreating troops. Horses were carefully bred and trained, reflecting Babylon's investment in military resources. Siege warfare also became a Babylonian specialty. Hammurabi understood that many Mesopotamian cities were protected by huge mud brick walls. To conquer these places, direct assault was often impossible. Instead, the army built ramps, battering rams, and wooden siege towers. Soldiers dug tunnels under walls to collapse them, or blocked canals to starve a city into surrender. These techniques demanded engineering knowledge, showing how military and administrative networks work together. Recruitment of soldiers came from multiple sources. Free farmers owed military service as part of their tax responsibility. Some elite families provided highly trained fighters. Others supplied equipment. Mercenaries were occasionally hired. especially during large campaigns, adding diversity to the army. Many conquered regions later provided troops, turning former enemies into soldiers. Hammurabi rewarded loyal warriors with land and privileges, building trust and motivation. Logistics formed the backbone of Hammurabi's military success, supplying soldiers with food, weapons, spare tools, and medical treatment required enormous organization. Government-controlled warehouses stored grain and dried meat for campaign seasons. Boats along the Euphrates transported supplies, while pack animals carried equipment through desert terrain. Babylonian scribes recorded rations, weapon deliveries, and military accounts, preventing theft and ensuring fairness. Communication during war was equally advanced. Messengers on horseback carried information across battlefields, and signal fires alerted Babylonian forces to enemy movement. Commanders studied maps and planned routes designed to avoid natural barriers. These preparations ensured Hammurabi's army moved with impressive coordination. Evidence suggests his troops respected their king deeply. Soldiers saw Hammurabi as a chosen leader fighting under divine protection. This belief inspired loyalty and courage. When soldiers believed Shamash and Marduk marched beside them, fear weakened. That spiritual dimension fused military power with cultural identity. The result was a fighting force unlike anything Mesopotamia had seen. A disciplined, well-equipped, motivated, and strategically guided army capable of defeating kingdoms far older and richer than Babylon. Hammurabi did not depend on brute force alone. His campaigns reveal careful strategy shaped by timing, psychology, geography, and diplomacy. Mesopotamia's political landscape was unstable, full of rival kings who alternated between cooperation and treachery. Hammurabi used this instability to his advantage. Instead of attacking all enemies at once, he dismantled them in stages, choosing the right moment to strike. His early campaigns remained defensive, protecting borders and controlling irrigation systems. Hammurabi knew that if canals fell into enemy hands, agriculture would collapse. Therefore, military success and water management became inseparable goals. By protecting water routes, he controlled the economic heartbeat of the region. When Hammurabi began offensive action, he used alliances like stepping stones. He first allied with Mari against Eshnunna and Larsa, allowing him to defeat one rival while holding another in check. Zimrilim of Mari provided troops and intelligence, helping Babylon push east and south. Yet Hammurabi always understood alliances as temporary agreements, not permanent friendships. Once Larsa fell, the alliance with Mari became less useful, and eventually Hammurabi turned against his former ally. Psychological strategy was equally important. He spread images of justice and divine authority, convincing many city-states that Babylon's conquest meant peace rather than destruction. Some towns surrendered voluntarily, believing Hammurabi's law system offered protection against tyranny. Others fell because their citizens refused to fight for corrupt rulers. In this sense, Hammurabi conquered through ideology as well as violence. The conquest of Larsa stands as a masterclass in strategy. Hammurabi waited until Rimsin became isolated through years of warfare. Babylon cut trade routes, seized irrigation canals, and slowly strangled Larsa's economy. When the final battle came, Rimsin stood alone, weakened, and surrounded. Babylon claimed the victory not only through military might, but through patient attrition. The campaign against Mari was different. Hammurabi initially respected Mari's power because it guarded vital trade networks. But once Babylon controlled southern Mesopotamia, Mari represented competition, not cooperation. Hammurabi gathered evidence of betrayal, then attacked swiftly, capturing the great palace, archives, and regional centers. With Mari gone, Babylon dominated trade stretching from the Persian Gulf to Syria. Northern campaigns required less bloodshed. Hammurabi pressured Assyrian leaders through diplomacy, convincing them to submit rather than fight. Tribute agreements replaced battlefields. This achievement shows that Hammurabi preferred efficient rule to needless warfare. Hammurabi also used messaging strategically. Royal inscriptions framed campaigns as moral missions. He claimed to rescue the oppressed, punish wicked kings, and restore divine balance. Whether every justification was true or not, these messages shaped public perception. Mesopotamian citizens believed Hammurabi fought for justice, not greed. After conquest, the army did not simply destroy cities. Babylon installed governors, distributed farmland, stationed troops, and reorganized tax systems. Conquered territories became integrated parts of the empire instead of temporary trophies. This method of empire building made Hammurabi different from kings who attacked recklessly without planning. Every campaign had long-term goals, and each conquered region strengthened Babylon's future. Hammurabi understood that taking land was easy. Keeping it required administration, diplomacy, and law. Through such calculated strategy, Hammurabi changed the map of Mesopotamia permanently. Babylon transformed from a minor state into the dominant force of its age, owed not only to armies, but to leadership vision. Conquering Mesopotamia was only half of Hammurabi's achievement. The other half was preventing the empire from falling apart. Many kings in ancient history won battles, but lost peace. Hammurabi avoided this fate by establishing systems to maintain control long after soldiers returned home. First, he installed loyal governors in conquered regions. These men were chosen for administrative skill rather than noble birth alone. They collected taxes, judged legal cases, supervised irrigation, managed labor, and maintained communication with Babylon. Because governors depended on the king for authority, rebellion became less tempting. Second, Hammurabi stationed troops in strategic locations across the empire. Garrisons protected trade routes, guarded canals, and discouraged uprisings. Military presence reassured Babylonian citizens living in distant territories that help would arrive if danger threatened them. It also warned conquered populations that rebellion would be punished. Third, Hammurabi used his legal code as a tool of occupation. Instead of forcing conquered people to abandon their traditions completely, he integrated them under Babylonian law. The code offered fairness and predictability, making people more willing to accept new rulers. In cities once ruled by tyranny or corruption, Hammurabi's system appeared liberating. Property protection, debt relief laws, and anti-corruption measures helped citizens accept Babylonian authority. Fourth, Hammurabi encouraged economic growth in conquered areas. Instead of seizing all farmland for Babylon, he often allowed locals to retain land ownership. He repaired or expanded irrigation canals, increased agricultural output, and connected trade routes. By improving daily life, he ensured people had more to gain under Babylon than by rebellion. Fifth, Hammurabi practiced cultural tolerance. Unlike later empires that forced religious conformity, Babylon allowed local gods to remain worshipped. Temples continued rituals, priests retained influence, and cultural life continued. However, Marduk slowly rose to the top of the divine hierarchy, becoming a unifying symbol. This approach prevented religious rebellion and made Babylon culturally inclusive. Sixth, communication networks kept the empire responsive. Messengers on foot, horseback, or boat carried reports daily. Governors wrote clay tablets to administration centers. Problems such as famine, floods, or banditry reached Babylon quickly, allowing intervention before crises escalated. This responsiveness prevented distant provinces from feeling abandoned. Seventh, Hammurabi used population management. When conquered cities had large rebellious groups, he sometimes relocated populations, turning former enemies into farmers or soldiers elsewhere. This redistribution prevented rebellion clusters. Finally, Hammurabi controlled narrative. Royal inscriptions, monuments, and public readings portrayed him as shepherd of the people. When citizens viewed him as guardian rather than tyrant, loyalty strengthened. Through these strategies, Hammurabi achieved something rare in ancient history: a conquering empire that remained stable through law, administration, and trust not fear alone. His success illustrates that government based on justice can be more powerful than government based on terror. Religion was the philosophical backbone of Hammurabi's rule, and among all deities worshipped in his empire, one name stood above the rest: Marduk. Before Hammurabi, Marduk existed as a city god of Babylon, but he was not yet the supreme figure in the Mesopotamian pantheon. Cities like Nippur worshipped Enlil as king of the gods. Uar honored Nana, the moon deity, and Eridu looked to Enki. Hammurabi changed this religious landscape dramatically and permanently by elevating Marduk to national prominence. His rise mirrored Babylon's political ascent, creating a fusion between religious authority and imperial identity. Hammurabi understood the strategic value of religious unification. If conquered territories accepted Babylon's god as the highest divine authority, loyalty toward the empire would deepen. This transformation did not happen overnight. It evolved through literature, festivals, hymns, and ideological messaging. The Code of Hammurabi itself begins with a declaration that Marduk appointed Hammurabi to bring justice and order, replacing chaos with stability. Such introduction served a political purpose. It told every Babylonian citizen that the king was chosen not by human succession alone, but by the will of the divine ruler of the cosmos. The king became Marduk's instrument, and the law became Marduk's voice. This connection helped legitimize Hammurabi's actions. Military conquest was framed as sacred duty, social reform as divine instruction, and justice as cosmic necessity. By reading the prologue of the Code aloud during public ceremonies, Babylonian priests reinforced the message that Hammurabi ruled because the gods demanded it, not because armies granted it. Temple expansion furthered Marduk's dominance. During Hammurabi's reign, construction efforts focused heavily on Babylon's main temple complex, Esagila, which housed Marduk's symbolic presence. The future of the empire depended not simply on soldiers and farmers, but on scribes who could read, write, calculate, organize, and communicate across huge distances. Without scribes, the legal system could not function. Business contracts would fail, historical events would be forgotten, and justice would lack consistency. Writing had existed in Mesopotamia for more than 1,000 years before Hammurabi, beginning with pictographs and evolving into cuneiform, one of the most complex scripts ever created. Cuneiform allowed writers to record daily life through wedge-shaped impressions on wet clay tablets. The script contained hundreds of signs representing syllables, ideas, sounds, and objects. Learning cuneiform demanded years of disciplined training. Hammurabi supported this educational tradition because his empire needed literate workers capable of managing archives, recording taxes, copying law, and producing government reports. Scribal schools, called Idubas, became essential institutions within cities like Babylon, Sippar, and Nippur. These schools trained boys, mostly from wealthy or middle-class families, in reading, writing, grammar, mathematics, and culture. Students began with simple signs, practicing strokes over and over again on broken tablets. As they progressed, they copied myths, hymns, proverbs, and legal passages. Some lessons involved copying older Sumerian texts, preserving languages long extinct to ordinary citizens. The use of Sumerian in education reflected respect for heritage and continuity. Even though Akkadian was the spoken language under Hammurabi, scribes were bilingual, capable of reading older sacred texts. Discipline in scribal schools was strict. Teachers used rods to punish mistakes or laziness. Students worked long hours seated on stone benches, repeating words aloud, memorizing sign lists, and performing math drills. The school day trained not only intellect, but also patience and obedience. As Babylonian influence spread across southern Mesopotamia, priests loyal to Marduk were installed into positions once held by clergy from other cities. Instead of suppressing rival gods violently, Hammurabi practiced a gradual restructuring of the pantheon. Enlil and Shamash retained importance, but their authority appeared increasingly subordinate to Marduk. This reshaping of divine hierarchy had long-term cultural consequences. Later Babylonian myths, especially the creation epic Enuma Elish, transformed Marduk into the cosmic hero who defeated chaos and created humanity. These stories emerged after Hammurabi, but his political system laid their foundation. Without the empire he built, Marduk might never have risen beyond local worship. Religious festivals also played a critical role in shaping identity. The most important Babylonian holiday, the New Year festival known as a Akitu, involved public rituals that celebrated Marduk's power, reaffirmed the king's right to rule, and symbolically renewed the universe. During the ceremony, statues of gods traveled through the city, crowds chanted prayers, and priests reenacted mythological events. These celebrations reminded citizens that their world functioned through divine order, a belief that supported Hammurabi's legal ideology. Marduk's transformation from city god to king of gods shows Hammurabi's brilliance. Instead of forcing unity through cultural destruction, he used religion as an adhesive, binding different people into shared spiritual experience. The spread of Marduk's worship created a common emotional language across the empire. Sumerians, Akkadians, Amorites, and others may have spoken different dialects, but they eventually respected the same deity. Through Marduk, Hammurabi changed Mesopotamian religious history forever. His approach ensured Babylon's cultural memory would survive long after his military empire faded. The identity of Hammurabi's empire rested on the belief that law was not simply a human invention. It was a divine principle. Hammurabi portrayed his legal system as the earthly extension of heavenly justice. Unlike modern law, which depends on secular institutions and personal rights, Hammurabi's law relied on spiritual accountability. This cultural framework shaped how citizens responded to authority, how judges made decisions, and how communities formed moral behavior. At the core of this relationship stood Shamash, the god of truth and justice. In the artwork carved on the top of Hammurabi's stele, the king receives the rod and ring, symbols of authority from Shamash. This imagery told viewers that the gods controlled human law. Anyone defying the code was not just defying the king, but violating spiritual order. The blending of religion and law made Hammurabi's system powerful. Obeying law became a moral duty, enforced not only by physical punishment, but by fear of divine judgment. Oaths taken in court further demonstrate this connection. Before testimony, witnesses swore in the name of specific gods. Breaking an oath risked cosmic punishment, sickness, misfortune, or death. This fear prevented perjury more effectively than any courtroom threat. Even today, the idea of swearing on holy texts echoes this ancient tradition. Temples acted as centers of legal administration. Priests recorded business contracts, loan agreements, and marriage documents. They served as guardians of written truth, ensuring legal records remained safe. Temple granaries stored debt repayments and tax grain. As a result, religion and law shared administrative space. Hammurabi did not separate church and state. He merged them intentionally. The moral structure of Hammurabi's laws reflected theological beliefs about cosmic balance. The universe was understood as a delicate system maintained by truthfulness, respect, and justice. Crime threatened that order. Theft was not just an economic violation. It disrupted harmony. Violence was not only physical harm. It insulted the gods who protected human dignity. Therefore, many punishments were symbolic acts of restoration. If a builder's negligence caused death, the builder died, not simply to punish the guilty, but to rebalance cosmic order. Ritual purification also tied law to spirituality. After certain crimes or accidents, individuals underwent ceremonies to remove impurity. Misfortune was believed to arise from spiritual imbalance, not only human wrongdoing. These rituals reassured people that life's hardships were not meaningless. They reflected divine forces responding to actions. Education strengthened this relationship. Students learning to write copied religious hymns and legal principles on clay tablets. They practiced both literacy and moral philosophy. Temple scribes became judges, accountants, and administrators. Their training blended spiritual devotion with practical responsibility, turning religion into a pathway towards civic leadership. Furthermore, Hammurabi's code emphasizes protection of the vulnerable because divine justice required compassion. Widows, orphans, and the poor were believed to be under the gods' special guardianship. Mistreating them invited supernatural punishment. These moral values helped prevent exploitation, creating a social safety net rooted in belief rather than bureaucracy. Together, these features show that ancient Babylon saw no boundary between spiritual faith and civic law. Hammurabi united human society under a framework where justice, worship, ethical behavior, and government were one interconnected system. That unity gave his empire strength. It allowed shared values to cross borders and survive the collapse of political systems. Hammurabi used religion not merely as ceremonial belief, but as ideological strategy. He crafted an image of himself that blended warrior, judge, shepherd, and prophet into a single sacred persona. Through this identity, Hammurabi transformed kingship from political position into holy institution. This pattern influenced later rulers across the ancient world, from Persian shahs to Roman emperors. Babylonian mythology played a crucial role in shaping the king's public image. The Code of Hammurabi begins with a long poetic prologue describing the gods choosing Hammurabi to prevent the strong from oppressing the weak and to illuminate the land with justice. These phrases did more than describe ambition. They wrote a mythic future for Hammurabi. When people read the code or heard it recited, they internalized the vision of a king acting under divine command. Propaganda inscriptions were carved onto temples, palace walls, and monuments across conquered territories. These messages praised Hammurabi as destroyer of evil rulers, protector of cities, and guardian of irrigation systems. He portrayed enemies as wicked kings who neglected their people, allowing famine and injustice. The contrast positioned Hammurabi as savior. Epic storytelling also shaped public perception. Oral poets celebrated Hammurabi's victories in rhythmic language, performing songs in markets and court gatherings. These songs spread across villages faster than written text. The poor, who could not read, learned about Hammurabi through performance. Songs told tales of justice, mercy, bravery, and divine favor. In this way, culture became a political instrument. The king also used symbols. He appeared publicly wearing ceremonial garments and carrying a staff resembling that of Shamash. His throne room held imagery linking him to gods. Visitors entering Babylon saw monumental architecture designed to inspire awe. The city functioned as ideological theater, telling every traveler, Babylon is the world's center, and Hammurabi is chosen ruler. Propaganda even influenced administration. Letters discovered from Hammurabi to governors reveal how he demanded justice for citizens. These documents circulated widely, reinforcing his image as a king who personally protected the weak. Whether or not Hammurabi actually read every petition, the idea that he did shaped loyalty. This sacred identity did not exclude humility. The epilogue of Hammurabi's code invites future kings to preserve his laws rather than destroy them. He warns them that any ruler who ignores justice will face divine wrath. Such statements suggest Hammurabi saw himself not as a mortal, but as part of cosmic chain. Mythology and political messaging allowed Hammurabi's legacy to survive long after his death. Later civilizations admired him not only as conqueror or lawgiver, but as righteous king. His blending of sacred identity with legal reform shaped political history. Rulers learned that belief systems could stabilize empires more effectively than armies alone. In the end, Hammurabi's triumph was not only military or political, but psychological and cultural. He convinced an entire population that justice came from the gods through him, and that idea outlasted Babylon itself. The economy of Hammurabi's Babylon depended first and foremost on agriculture. Without the immense agricultural engine feeding the empire, Hammurabi would never have been able to fund armies, build infrastructure, or maintain government offices. Agriculture shaped the rhythm of daily life, controlled patterns of settlement, and influenced how law functioned. Every season created economic possibilities and risks. Planting, irrigating, harvesting, and storing surplus grain demanded coordination on a scale that stretched across provinces. Babylon's wealth rested on the ability of thousands of farmers to cooperate under state supervision. The fields of southern Mesopotamia were rich but challenging. The soil, enriched by floods from the Euphrates and Tigris, produced abundant crops, especially barley. Barley became the core of the diet and the basis of the economy because it stored well and could be produced in large quantities. Wheat, lentils, sesame, dates, and onions also grew widely. Dates were especially valuable, used for syrup, alcohol, and medicine. Herd animals, sheep, goats, pigs, and cattle, added proteins and allowed large-scale wool production. Irrigation determined everything. Canals, ditches, levees, and water gates made farmland productive, but maintaining them required constant labor. Farmers depended on reliable water flow. Too little water meant crop failure, while too much caused destructive flooding. Hammurabi's law code demonstrates how deeply the government involved itself in irrigation management. Multiple laws strike directly at the dangers and responsibilities surrounding water control. If a man neglected to maintain his section of canal and damage occurred downstream, he owed compensation equal to the ruined harvest. If negligence led to catastrophic flooding, the guilty farmer could lose land or be sold to pay damages. These laws reveal that Hammurabi believed society must protect agriculture at all costs. The state took major responsibility for large-scale canal systems, using tax resources and forced labor to clear silt, reinforce dikes, and regulate water flow. Archaeologists believe the massive canals stretching across Babylonia were some of the most advanced water networks in the ancient world. These waterways not only irrigated farms, but enabled transportation, moving boats loaded with grain to cities and trade ports. This connection between agriculture and transportation made the economy highly efficient. Agricultural records also show how land ownership varied. Some land belonged to the king and temples, other land to aristocrats, and large sections to free farmers. Tenant farming was common. A landowner provided seeds, tools, animals, and land, while tenants offered their labor and shared crop yields. Hammurabi protected tenant farmers with legal standards. If harvests failed due to natural causes, farmers were not responsible for rent. But if laziness or negligence caused losses, punishment followed. Storage was another major factor. Grain collected at harvest had to survive insects, rodents, mold, and theft over many months. Hammurabi's laws mention regulated storage structures, temple granaries, and taxation warehouses. These storage centers served as insurance against famine. In years of surplus, grain was set aside so that in drought years people could survive. Agriculture also linked to religion. Priests oversaw temple lands, using the profits to fund rituals and festivals. Their economic power made temples some of the largest landholding institutions in the empire. Babylonian agriculture was therefore far more than farming. It was a highly structured economic machine supported by science, religion, infrastructure, and law. Hammurabi inherited this system and improved its efficiency, turning Babylon into a powerhouse whose wealth supported everything from palace construction to international diplomacy. When analyzing the empire's success, historians must begin here, in the fields, canals, and granaries where Babylon's prosperity was born. While agriculture formed the base of Babylon's economy, long-distance trade gave Hammurabi's empire wealth, prestige, and access to foreign materials unavailable locally. Babylon sat at a crossroads between powerful regions: Anatolia to the northwest, Iran to the east, the Persian Gulf to the south, and Syria to the west. Geographic location made the city a commercial bridge connecting multiple civilizations. Merchants traveled across deserts and mountains, forming networks that carried metals, woods, jewelry, textiles, spices, and precious stones into Mesopotamia. Tin and copper were especially important. Bronze, the dominant metal of the age, required both. Mesopotamia lacked major copper and tin resources, so they imported tin from Afghanistan and copper, likely from Oman or Cyprus. Without this metal flow, Babylonian builders and weapon makers would have struggled. Hammurabi's law code reveals strict rules surrounding metal trade. Merchants had to record all shipments, making fraud risky. This helped keep the metal economy stable. Babylon also imported timber from Lebanon and Syria. Mesopotamia had little forest land, so wood was valuable. Timber built temples, houses, furniture, and ships. Laws covered illegal lumber trade, showing tree products were considered national assets. The Persian Gulf opened maritime trade routes to distant civilizations. We know from archaeology that Babylon exchanged goods with Dilmun, modern Bahrain, the Indus Valley, and regions near Oman and possibly India. Babylonian seals appear far outside Mesopotamia, suggesting merchants traveled great distances. Ships transported pearls, ivory, exotic shells, and spices into Babylon. In exchange, the empire offered grain, oil, woolen textiles, pottery, and written expertise. Babylonian writing and mathematics were considered prestigious exports. Administrators from foreign kingdoms sometimes used Babylonian scribes because they trusted cuneiform accounting. Trade caravans traveled overland through caravanserais, rest stations that dotted roads. Water sources, grazing areas, and storehouses protected merchants. These stations represented early forms of international logistics networks. Each region controlled certain routes. Mari served as gateway to Syria, Eshnunna opened the path toward Iran, and Assyria dominated trade with Anatolia. Hammurabi's conquest placed many of these routes under Babylonian control. Currency and payment systems were sophisticated. Although coins did not exist yet, silver served as primary exchange medium. Merchants measured silver by weight using standardized scales. Hammurabi's laws regulated dishonest weights and demanded severe punishment for fraud. Prices, interest rates, and loan structures appear in the code, proving the economy ran on regulated finance. Urban markets sold both everyday necessities and luxury imports. People could buy beer, bread, fish, vegetables, pottery, shoes, oils, perfumes, and fine textiles. Artisans crafted jewelry and decorated objects using imported gemstones such as lapis lazuli. These luxury markets created social mobility. Skilled artisans could rise in wealth and status. Trade also influenced culture. Foreign goods brought new ideas, languages, and artistic styles to Babylon. Craftsmen adopted foreign motifs, blending Mesopotamian religion with Syrian and Anatolian patterns. Cultural exchange enriched literature, music, and food. Beliefs spread through these networks. Mythological concepts likely traveled with merchant caravans. To maintain trade safety, Hammurabi used soldiers to patrol roads and punish bandits. He also standardized commercial law, giving merchants legal security far from home. If a merchant entrusted goods to a shipping agent, the agent was legally bound to avoid fraud or face harsh penalties. This legal protection fostered confidence in commerce. International diplomacy worked hand in hand with trade. Alliances often depended on economic partnership. Babylon supplied grain to drought-stricken regions in exchange for peace or resources. Hammurabi used trade as a political tool just as effectively as he used the military. The result was an interconnected economic world, with Babylon positioned as a hub. Without these networks, Hammurabi's empire would have remained a regional power instead of an international center of wealth. Trade shaped identity, prosperity, and geopolitical strategy in ways still visible through surviving records. Taxation under Hammurabi formed the structural spine of empire administration. Everything from the army to irrigation canals, from scribal schools to temple repair, depended on reliable revenue flow. Taxes were paid through grain, livestock, labor, and silver, depending on occupation and location. Farmers owed grain harvest shares. Herders delivered wool or animals. Merchants paid trade taxes, and craftsmen offered goods or silver wages. Temples and royal estates collected enormous revenue, transferring wealth to state treasury systems. Babylon also practiced corvée labor, mandatory public work service. Farmers and workers helped dig canals, build walls, and maintain roads. This system replaced heavy cash taxation, allowing the poor to contribute through physical labor rather than money. Hammurabi's law code tightly regulated corvée labor to prevent abuse by officials. If a labor overseer forced extra service outside legal requirement, he faced penalty. Banking existed in early form. Temples acted like financial institutions, lending grain or silver to citizens and collecting repayment with interest. Hammurabi set interest ceilings to prevent predatory lending practices. Records show interest for silver loans typically remained around 20%, high by modern standards, but controlled relative to ancient norms. Debt slavery existed, but laws limited it. If someone sold themselves or a child into debt servitude, the service ended after 3 years. This prevented permanent generational enslavement and kept the economy mobile. Property loans and mortgages appear in documents from Hammurabi's reign. Individuals used land, livestock, or goods as collateral. Contracts written on clay tablets ensured legal protection and prevented argument. Judges consulted these records during disputes, and witnesses sealed tablets to confirm authenticity. Canals required precise measurement to ensure water flowed, neither too fast nor too slow. Engineers calculated gradients through practical experimentation. They dug feeder channels, built embankments, and reinforced edges with baked brick. Dams and gates regulated water flow. This irrigation system turned desert plains into breadbasket lands, feeding cities and supporting growth. Roads also reveal innovation. Workers prepared foundation layers with packed clay and gravel, allowing caravans to travel longer distances carrying heavy loads. Roads supported trade and communication across the empire. Without roads, Hammurabi could not have controlled distant territories nor maintained swift communication networks. Bridges crossed major canals, constructed using timber beams and mud brick supports. They enabled movement into city centers, proving the empire valued transportation efficiency. Hammurabi's construction laws proved that engineering was highly respected. Building collapse could cause death and social disaster. The severe punishment for negligent builders reflects how important architectural reliability was for Babylonian life. Engineering shaped religious identity. Temples were designed not just for ritual practice, but to impress worshippers with divine symbolism. Sculpted reliefs and decorative tiles added visual meaning. Architects understood emotional effects. Large spaces inspired awe. These achievements reveal a civilization that combined science with practicality, imagination with planning, and creativity with law. Babylonian architecture shows a culture grounded in knowledge, not primitive chance. Scientific knowledge in Hammurabi's time extended beyond construction technology. It flourished through mathematics, astronomy, and record-keeping. While modern science uses equations and instruments beyond ancient imagination, Babylonian intellectual achievements laid foundations for later discoveries in Greece, Persia, and Islamic astronomy. And that brings our incredible journey across Hammurabi's Babylon to a close. Today on History Teller YT, you learned how a king shaped the world not just through conquest, but through justice and knowledge. You saw how the Code of Hammurabi created fairness, protected the weak, controlled the powerful, and built the foundation for future civilizations. You discovered how agriculture fed an entire empire, how scribes preserved knowledge for eternity, how women held economic strength and family authority, how slaves could rise to freedom, how temples served as brains of civilization, how mathematics and astronomy shaped science, how trade connected cultures, how empire diplomacy changed politics, and how religion guided ethics, identity, and daily life. The moral of Hammurabi's story is this: civilization survives only when law protects people, not rulers. Justice builds stronger nations than swords ever can. Even though Hammurabi lived almost 4,000 years ago, his ideas still shape our world today. Our courts, our contracts, our punishments, our education, our governments, and our belief that society must protect the weak from the strong. If this journey opened your imagination, if you felt history come alive, then the story has succeeded. And remember, this is just one civilization among thousands. The ancient world is endless, and here on History Teller YT, we will continue exploring Egypt, Rome, Greece, Persia, Indus Valley, China, Maya, Vikings, and many more forgotten empires waiting to speak again. So don't forget to like this episode, share your thoughts in the comments, subscribe for more deep storytelling, and invite others to join this growing historical community. Thank you for traveling across time with us today. Until the next adventure, keep asking questions, keep exploring, and never stop learning. This is History Teller YT, signing off. See you again soon on our next extraordinary journey through time.